7 minutes, one courtroom, and a recording so explosive it made the Speaker of the House tremble. The lights were too bright, the silence too loud, and as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood up with that tape in her hand, she wasn't just holding evidence, she was holding a mirror to everything America has tried to forget. The racism that whispers in back rooms, the power that hides behind polished desks, the silence that swallows the truth whole. What happened next didn't just shake the room. It stirred something deeper. In the mothers who've waited too long for answers. In the veterans whose flags were folded but whose dignity was lost. In the students who never made it home. This isn't just a story about AOC or about Mike Johnson. It's a story about all of us, about what happens when truth finds its voice and dares to speak in a place built to silence it. And while what you're about to see is a dramatized account inspired by real issues, every emotion, every heartbeat of justice and betrayal is deeply real. So now we ask the question, when the truth finally stands up, will justice have the courage to rise with it? It was just past 8:30 a.m. on Capitol Hill, but the tension in room 226 felt older, like it had been waiting overnight, sitting in the walls, pacing under the carpet. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. The marble floors glared under the cold light. A hush fell over the chamber as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped through the double doors. Navy suit, crisp black heels, sharp, her expression unreadable. No entourage, no theatrics. Just a folder tucked tightly under her arm and a mind like a blade behind her eyes. She nodded at no one, but everyone noticed. Reporters whispered. One of the aides glanced at her color-coded tabs, each folder labeled with precise black ink: Bronx schools, nutrition cuts, mental health, 2023 surge, 3 stories, 3 fires, and none of them were officially on today's agenda. Today's hearing on federal education funding had been billed as routine, a procedural shuffle of budget lines and buzzwords, but no one had told the truth to the truth teller walking in. At the far end of the horseshoe-shaped table, Speaker Mike Johnson adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at his watch, and leaned toward his mic with the kind of smile that never touches the eyes. "Let's begin. I trust we can stick to the facts today," he said, pausing deliberately before adding, "not feelings." A few staffers chuckled. It was a practiced jab, soft enough to pass, sharp enough to land, the kind designed to sting without sounding uncivil. AOC didn't blink. But a quiet shift stirred in the room, the way barometric pressure changes before a storm. She placed her folders gently on the polished oak table. One by one, she opened them, not to read, but to show. Inside were photographs, charts, testimonies, a child's crayon drawing labeled, "My school is cold," a counselor's suicide note declassified under a FOIA request, a post-it from a mother, "Please don't cut the after-school food. My son eats once a day." None of that was visible to the cameras yet, but she laid it out like evidence for a trial nobody realized had begun. Mike Johnson cleared his throat again, this time tighter, shorter. "Congresswoman, I hope today we stay within the scope of the hearing," he said, eyes narrowing. She finally looked up. "Oh, I plan to," she replied calmly. And in that moment, it wasn't just a line, it was a warning. The C-SPAN live stream ticked quietly in the background. Online, the view count began to rise. 112 viewers, 238, then 970. No one yet knew what she had in her pocket. No one could see the tiny black USB drive tucked under the Bronx folder. But in 7 minutes, everything would change, and one of the most powerful men in America would beg for the cameras to stop rolling. The committee room was chilled, but heavy, as if the marble walls themselves were listening. AOC adjusted the mic, slid a color-coded folder labeled Bronx schools into view, and began. Last year, PS 81 reported 42 asthma-related emergency calls, up 300% from 2021. The cafeteria's refrigerator broke midweek, and not one replacement request was approved. 83 students went without lunch. For 3 days. She paused. No theatrics, just the numbers. She opened a second folder, nutrition cuts. These aren't anecdotes, they're warnings. When a child can't breathe or eat, the system isn't underperforming, it's collapsing. Murmurs rippled through the room. A mother in the public gallery wiped her cheek. AOC didn't break gaze with the chairman. Mike Johnson leaned forward, elbows wide, confidence oozing from his posture. He tapped a pen slowly against his notes, eyes scanning the room before responding. "Well, I appreciate the drama," he began, voice cool and composed. "But we need policy, not a Netflix monologue." The air dropped 10 degrees. A few chuckles echoed behind him. His staff, maybe a reporter or two trying to mask discomfort. AOC remained still. She turned a page in her folder. One deliberate movement. Johnson wasn't done. He leaned back now, relaxed like a man, with a match he couldn't wait to strike. "You know," he said almost casually, "you talk like Rosa Parks. But let's be honest. You're not Rosa Parks. You're just camera-friendly." The room did not gasp, it exhaled, all at once. A young journalist near the back visibly froze, her fingers halting mid-keystroke. A veteran photographer dropped his lens cap. Even Representative Wells, who rarely blinked, shifted in his seat. AOC said nothing. She closed her folder. Softly, slowly. No clatter, no reaction. Just the sound of edges aligning perfectly, paper tucked back into silence. She didn't look at Johnson. She didn't look at the crowd. She simply reached for her water glass, took one sip, and placed it back exactly where it had been. Mike Johnson seemed to wait for a response. A sign of protest, a fumble, anything. But AOC's silence wasn't a pause. It was a verdict, and everyone in that room felt it, though no one could name it yet. Not the tension, not the temperature shift, not even the invisible line that had just been crossed. But something had changed, and no one, not even Johnson, could take it back. The silence after Johnson's jab wasn't passive. It was thunder held in a glass. No one breathed too loudly. Not aides, not reporters, not even the Congress people who'd come expecting a quiet education hearing and now sat on the edge of something tectonic. AOC sat motionless for 3 full seconds, long enough to be noticed, long enough for the weight of the insult to fully settle in the room. Her hands rested on her lap. Her eyes didn't flinch. Then, with the same quiet deliberation she'd used to close her folder, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. It was a smooth, deliberate motion without urgency but with purpose. She pulled out a small device, black and silver, no larger than a business card. She placed it on the committee desk with care directly beneath the microphone, aligning it parallel to the nameplate that read, Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There was a beep. A quiet red light blinked to life. She leaned slightly forward. Her voice, when it came, was steady, smooth, and barely above a whisper, but every mic in the room caught it. "Let the record reflect everything." Not a syllable more. She didn't explain, didn't point fingers, didn't name the insult or the insulter. She simply leaned back into her chair, clasped her hands together, and returned her gaze forward unshaken. In the press gallery, heads turned toward each other in disbelief. Laptops clicked. Phones rose, recording from behind press passes and notepads. Within 30 seconds, one live tweet hit AOC, "Just put a recorder on the table." No response. Just let the record reflect everything. Cold, calculated, chilling. Hill Wire News. By the time the next committee members stumbled through their questioning, the hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Echo Room. Hashtag She Recorded It. Hashtag Let the Record Reflect. Back in the room, Mike Johnson stiffened but said nothing. His smirk faded, not from fear, but from unfamiliarity. He had miscalculated. He had expected outrage, retaliation, a firework of emotion. Instead, he was staring across the room at someone who had replaced fury with precision. And that unnerved him more than anything. For the rest of the hearing, AOC said nothing. She took notes. She nodded at witnesses. She closed her folders in the same neat rhythm, her posture never breaking. The recorder's red light blinked patiently through every moment. Uninterrupted, undeniable. Later that night, the video clip would circulate on every major network, not for any speech but for its absence. It would be spliced next to Johnson's smirk, his slur, and her silence. One journalist called it the quietest mic drop in congressional history. But for the millions watching from phones, living rooms, and classrooms across the country, it wasn't just silence. It was a warning. And it had been recorded. By nightfall, the clip had crossed oceans. It wasn't just replayed, it was dissected. Civil rights attorneys in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles released statements within hours. One called it a constitutional moment, not a viral one. Another wrote, what Rep. Ocasio-Cortez captured on that recorder wasn't just a slur, it was the sound of systemic erosion. TikTok lit up. Clips of the red light blinking, captioned, "She said nothing," and it said everything racked up millions of views. Girls in school cafeterias and dorm rooms filmed reaction videos, often in silence themselves. Some lip-synced AOC's single sentence, pointing at their own school desks like they were in that hearing room. Others simply stared into the camera, then tapped a table twice and whispered, "Let the record reflect." Within 18 hours, the audio was meme, mantra, and movement. Cable news scrambled to keep up. Progressive anchors called Johnson's words calculated degradation. Commentators replayed the insult frame by frame, analyzing AOC's stillness like it was courtroom footage from history. On MSNBC, one panelist said it wasn't a silence of surrender. It was strategy, surgical, generational, and chilling. But across the aisle, conservative platforms spun a different tale. She overreacted. One headline read, "It was a joke. Political theater." Johnson himself appeared on a mid-morning podcast, his voice breezy. "People are acting like I committed a felony." It was a quip. "She's just emotional. It's politics." He laughed. So did the host. They called it theatrics, then pivoted to inflation, but the damage had already started to calcify. Lawyers began threading together legal codes on public defamation. Activists flooded Capitol Hill with statements tagging every representative in sight. College debate teams posted solidarity videos, quoting AOC's final line before turning off their cameras. Journalists noticed something subtle but powerful. AOC herself said nothing. No tweets, no press conferences, no follow-up. Just that blinking red light now looping across television sets like a national heartbeat. Political satirists had a field day. Late-night sketches mimicked Johnson's insult with cartoonish flair, but every laugh ended with a clip of AOC's stillness played in full. Audiences didn't laugh through it. They sat in that same breathless hush as the original room. At Howard University, a civil rights symposium paused its regular programming and played the clip on a projector. A student stood up after eyes wet and said, "I didn't know silence could shake a room like that." By the end of the week, Ahern Echo Room had topped 25 million posts. But it wasn't just a hashtag anymore. It was a question, a reckoning, a fuse. People weren't asking if it went too far. They were asking what came next, and the answer was already being drafted. The next morning at precisely 9:31 a.m., the federal courthouse in D.C. received a 38-page document that would ricochet through every chamber of power in America. Case title Ocasio-Cortez v. Johnson. Filed under the Civil Defamation Act, the suit requested $120 million in damages. The allegations were laid out starkly: gender-based degradation, public humiliation, and racially coded mockery, broadcast on government record. The exhibit list was short but devastating: transcripts, video frames, and most damning of all, a time-stamped audio file from the digital recorder. The complaint didn't mince words. "No title grants immunity from consequence," read the opening paragraph. "Words spoken under oath in public office with intent to diminish and distort identity are not protected. They are prosecutable." By 10 Aru, also AM news trucks had circled the courthouse. Microphones hovered like wasps outside the marble steps. Every major outlet scrambled for first comment. A junior aide from AOC's office finally emerged, read a single sentence from a printed sheet, then turned away without questions. This case is not about wounded pride. It's about systemic impunity. Inside the Capitol, Johnson's office blinds were pulled tight. His comms team huddled behind closed doors, red-faced and divided. Some advised apology. Others proposed countersuit. One even floated resignation, only to be shouted down. "He's not going anywhere," one senior advisor snapped. "He's going to ride this out. He always does." But this time the calculus was different. This wasn't just a political spat caught on tape. It was an elected official accused in writing of weaponizing office language against an entire demographic and doing it with smug calculation. What made it worse was the footage, the visible sneer, the mocking lilt, the dead silence that followed. It wasn't performative. It was deliberate. And now it was Exhibit A. On Twitter, legal scholars posted line-by-line breakdowns of the complaint explaining that the case, though difficult, was not unwinnable. If the court accepts public harm and identity targeting as actionable defamation, one thread read, it'll be a landmark. But perhaps the boldest response came from someone unexpected. Michelle Obama reposted the audio clip that afternoon with just 4 words, "There's power in poise." 10 million likes followed. So did think pieces, academic essays, and entire Sunday panels devoted to the question, can dignity be weaponized? Back in her district office, AOC stayed off camera. She sat by a window overlooking the Bronx skyline, phone face down, watching pigeons land on a streetlight. She'd said her piece. Now the law would speak next. And whether the courtroom echoed like the hearing room or shattered like glass remained to be seen. At 3:06 p.m. the next day, reporters gathered in the White Room of the Capitol's East Wing. A single podium stood centered beneath the seal. The press had been tipped just 20 minutes earlier. Mike Johnson will address the public at 3 p.m. sharp. No questions would be taken. When the doors finally opened, he walked out with a practiced calm. Crisp blue suit, lapel pin gleaming. His expression was composed, but behind his eyes something coiled tight. Cameras clicked. Microphones powered up. And with a clipped nod, he began. "This isn't personal," he said, voice steady. "It's disagreement, spirited disagreement. The foundation of democracy." He paused for effect, then folded his hands at the podium. "What we're witnessing," he continued, "is a theatrical overreach. A disagreement over policy, not personhood, is being framed as moral outrage. That's not justice. That's defamation in costume." The phrasing was deliberate. Each word edged with confidence, every sentence crafted to position himself as the rational statesman and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the emotional agitator. "She is entitled to her opinions," he added almost kindly, "but not to redefine offense as law. If we criminalize dissent, we weaken the very institution we both swore to protect." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sneer. But the arrogance was louder than any outburst. He smiled faintly at the end, what some called senatorial warmth, and stepped back from the podium without another word. The video aired on every network. Some anchors called it measured, others condescending. Conservative outlets praised him for clarity under fire, while progressive hosts ripped his statement apart for its patronizing tone and moral deflection. But AOC, she didn't take the bait. She didn't go live, didn't quote statutes, didn't summon lawyers or soundtracks or slogans. She posted a single black and white photo on Instagram. It was her at age 7 sitting on her father's lap in their modest Bronx apartment. Her caption was only a line, a quote from him, long gone now, but never forgotten. "When they can't dismiss your facts, they attack your face." It wasn't viral, it was volcanic. Within an hour, the post hit 3 million shares. Former students reposted it. Teachers quoted it. Black and brown teenagers across the country stitched TikToks over it, half crying, half proud. In corner barbershops and union halls and break rooms, people began to say it aloud. "They attack your face." It echoed because it was true. It hurt because it was familiar. And it stung Johnson too. Because even as he returned to his office, triumphant in posture, he found his staff unusually quiet. 2 aides watched the clip in the corner. Another stared at her phone. Nobody congratulated him. The air had shifted. He'd spoken his piece. But now a daughter's memory was speaking louder. The morning sky over Washington was the color of bruised steel. Across the city, televisions clicked on. Phones buzzed. Radios crackled to life. Every major news outlet, from legacy networks to streaming platforms, broadcast the same image: the federal courthouse's stone facade. Inside, the courtroom was hushed. Gallery seats were filled to capacity: lawyers, journalists, retired judges, students, clergy. No one spoke above a whisper. The air felt like before a thunderstorm, dense with anticipation, silent but trembling. At 9:01 a.m., the door opened. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered alone. No entourage, no sweeping entrance. Just one binder tucked under her arm, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already weathered storms far worse than this. She wore a tailored black suit, minimalist jewelry, and no makeup but eyeliner. Her face was calm, neither smiling nor somber, only focused. She walked past the press pit without a glance, nodded respectfully to the judge, and sat. At 9:03, Mike Johnson arrived. He came flanked by three attorneys, flashy, sharp-suited all briefcases and BlackBerry energy. Johnson scanned the room quickly, his gaze skipping AOC entirely. He took his seat, jaw tense, adjusting his cufflinks twice in less than a minute. Then the judge entered, an older black woman with a reputation for cutting through noise like a blade. She adjusted her glasses, tapped her gavel once, and spoke with unflinching clarity. "Let the record show, this is not a trial of politics. This is a trial of dignity." The room stilled. The words hit like stone on glass. Opening statements began. Johnson's team went first. Their lead counsel, a polished former prosecutor with a glint of theater, argued that the lawsuit was a political stunt, that AOC had manipulated public sympathy, weaponized media optics, and rebranded political critique as emotional injury. He painted her as strategic, not sincere. Then came AOC's turn. She stood slowly. No theatrics, no swelling voice, just a measured, anchored presence. Her opening was quiet, nearly soft. "I did not come here to win votes. I came here to remind this room that words, especially from power, have weight. And when they crush dignity, when they tell girls they are decorations, not leaders, those words have consequences." She paused. Her eyes met the judge's, then flicked to the jurors. "This is not about my feelings. This is about the right of every woman, every child of color, to not be humiliated for standing in truth." There were no hashtags trending yet. No applause. But something shifted in the room. One juror, an older Latino man with salt and pepper hair, lowered his pen and nodded. The cameras zoomed in. The networks aired it live. Commentators paused mid-sentence. Because for the first time in the trial, the issue wasn't legality or spin, it was humanity. And in that moment, AOC didn't look like a politician. She looked like someone fighting for everyone who'd ever been silenced behind a desk, shamed behind a smile, or called too emotional for demanding to be heard. The trial had begun. But something deeper had already started. The room had settled into a tense rhythm, objections, clarifications, side glances from the jury. But nothing had broken through the veil of professional detachment. Not yet, until the prosecution cued the evidence labeled Exhibit 7A. The lights dimmed slightly as a technician tapped a button on the courtroom's control panel. The speakers crackled. Static. Then a voice. Male. Confident. Unaware he was being recorded. "She's not here to legislate. She's a prop in a dress, made for messaging." Gasps. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Arrogant, dismissive, laced with something older, more dangerous than mere political rivalry. The jury jolted. One woman, a black juror in her 50s, wearing a pale green cardigan, pressed her fingers to her lips. Her eyes glistened. The audio continued. "If she wants to play activist, fine. Let her act. That's what people like her are built for." The room froze. Johnson's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. The air grew heavier, thicker. Mike Johnson, once composed, sat pale and stiff. His fingers clutched the edges of the defense table, knuckles white. His gaze darted toward the ceiling, then the floor. Anywhere but the jury. AOC didn't move. She kept her eyes down, one hand resting gently on the edge of her binder, as if steadying herself not from the attack, but from the restraint it took not to respond. The clip ended. Silence. Not courtroom silence, human silence. The kind where thoughts race and no one breathes too loud. The kind of silence that makes a moment stick forever. The judge finally spoke, her voice low but piercing. "Let the record reflect that this recording was authenticated, time-stamped, and verified by a third-party forensic lab." Then she turned slightly toward the jury. "You may not forget what you heard, but you must remember what it means." A murmur from the press section. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled frantically. Social media feeds flooded again. Hashtag prop in address. Hashtag he said it. Hashtag silent no more. For AOC's legal team, there was no need for additional commentary. The tape spoke volumes. The strategy was clear now, no theatrics, just truth. Let the words of power indict themselves. Let the public and this jury decide if America was still a place where dignity could be traded for dismissiveness and whether that was acceptable anymore. One juror, a retired school principal, leaned forward in his seat. He shook his head once, slowly, firmly. The damage was done, and the defense knew it. But what no one yet realized was that this recording, as damning as it was only the beginning, because just hours later another leak would follow. This time it wasn't audio, it was an internal email buried deep in the digital archives of Mike Johnson's office, and it would ignite the courtroom all over again. Just when the courtroom began to recover from the impact of the audio recording, the prosecution requested a 10-minute recess, only to return with something far colder than sound a document. It wasn't printed on official letterhead, no signature, just the subject line in bold messaging strategy Rep. Ocasio-Cortez, sender mjcoms@house.gov, timestamped 2 weeks before the hearing. The prosecutor walked to the center of the courtroom, lifted the printed email between 2 fingers, and held it as though it might contaminate the air. She read slowly, "Reminder to all spokespeople, use descriptors like emotional, unstable, drama queen consistently in post-hearing interviews. Reinforce narrative across platforms, TV, radio, digital. Silence. Not a single cough, not a shuffle. Only the dull hum of the courtroom lights and the quiet, invisible ache of dignity being violated again." The judge blinked hard, her jaw tensed. Then in one swift motion, she lifted her gavel and brought it down with a crack that echoed through the wood-paneled walls. "Order in this courtroom," the defense objected. They called it irrelevant, a strategic memo, not personal bias. But it was too late. The damage had been done not just to their case, but to the illusion of professionalism Johnson had clung to. This wasn't a political disagreement anymore. It was coordinated character assassination, thinly disguised as calm strategy. One juror clenched his fist. Another, a retired nurse, exhaled deeply, blinking back tears. These weren't just slurs, they were instructions. The prosecutor stepped closer to the jury box, her voice measured, but unmistakably furious. When a sitting congressman encourages his staff to describe a colleague with sexist, dehumanizing language, what message does that send to every girl watching at home? What message does it send to the sons in this courtroom? The weight of her words dropped like lead. Even the court reporter paused for half a beat before continuing to type. In the back row, a mother pulled her daughter closer. In the gallery, a civil rights attorney whispered to a colleague, "This isn't just about defamation. This is about systemic permission." Outside the courthouse, the leaks spread like wildfire. Hashtags multiplied by the minute. Yasha Drama Queen Memo, Shiach Coordinated Contempt. Joshua Email Gate, conservative pundits tried to downplay it. "It's just language," one anchor said. But for millions watching the live stream, it wasn't just language, it was proof. Proof that the slurs weren't slips of the tongue. They were intentional weapons. Back inside, AOC sat still, hands folded. She hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. She didn't need to. Her silence had more weight than any outburst could have carried, because now the public wasn't just watching for a verdict. They were watching for justice. And that's when the mood shifted from curiosity to conviction. The courtroom had grown used to tension, but not like this. This was a different kind of quiet, not fearful, not respectful, but anticipatory, as if every soul present knew something irreversible was about to unfold. AOC sat still, her posture straight, her eyes focused but soft. She hadn't said a word since the recording and email had surfaced. She didn't need to. Her silence had become its own kind of voice, calm, patient, and unforgiving. Her lead attorney rose slowly. No theatrics, no raised voice, just deliberate movement, like a surgeon preparing the first incision. "Mr. Johnson," she began, eyes locked on the witness stand. "Did you say the phrase? Get her off camera during the February 3rd strategy call." Johnson shifted in his seat. His left hand twitched slightly before retreating under the table. "I believe context matters." "Of course. And we'll get to context," the attorney replied evenly. "But for the court's clarity, did you use those exact words?" He swallowed. "Yes." But no further clarification needed yet. She cut in smoothly. "And were those words directed at my client, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez?" Pause. A beat too long. "Yes." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge's gavel came down once, but gently this time. Even she seemed to understand this was the moment the public needed to hear. "Mr. Johnson, do you recall what else you said on that call?" the attorney asked. "I don't recall every detail." Let me help. She reached for a transcript. According to this court-admitted exhibit, you said, quote, if she brings up asthma again, shut it down. She's playing the Bronx sob story. People eat that up. Do you deny saying that his face flushed lips pressed into a thin line? That line may have been paraphrased, but not denied. He didn't answer. The attorney stepped closer. You are aware, are you not, that childhood asthma rates in the Bronx are nearly twice the national average? That low-income Black and Latino children are being hospitalized at staggering rates due to mold and poor ventilation? He nodded stiffly. Then let me ask plainly, Mr. Johnson, was your concern for children's lives or for cameras? The room froze. No one breathed. Across the room, AOC remained still, her hands folded, gaze unwavering. Not triumphant, not bitter, but anchored. She wasn't watching Johnson. She was watching the jury. Johnson adjusted his collar, trying to find refuge in the silence. There was none. I was managing a narrative, he finally muttered. A narrative, the attorney repeated, letting the word hang. She turned toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, there it is. In his own words, not a plan to serve the people, not a strategy for education, nutrition, or public health, but a narrative where truth is inconvenient and compassion is a liability. Outside, the live stream viewer count ticked past 2.7 million. Inside, the spell was breaking. Not because AOC spoke, but because Johnson finally did, and it didn't save him. The court reconvened after a 20-minute recess, but something had shifted. The light filtering through the courthouse windows now felt colder, sharper, almost surgical. What was once a procedural defamation trial had turned into a slow unraveling, not of just words, but intent. The prosecution resumed their assault with quiet precision. This, the lead attorney said, raising another exhibit into view, was uncovered from Mr. Johnson's internal communications, dated just 2 days before the hearing. It was an email, this time forwarded to no fewer than 11 staffers. The subject line read, "New strategy, tone over content." The body of the message was brief but devastating. Discredit her using tone, not content. Make her look volatile, emotional, passionate in the wrong ways. Don't debate facts, debate her delivery. The medium is the message. A low rustle passed through the courtroom like a chill wind. On the witness stand, Johnson's counsel tried to object on the grounds of strategic language, but the judge overruled it with a tone that brooked no argument. Mr. Johnson, the judge said, locking eyes with him, this court reminds you that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. Johnson's lips parted, but no words came out. The attorney continued, let the jury consider this: a public official tasked with oversight of education deliberately bypasses facts to attack a fellow lawmaker's voice, not her data. Her tone, not her truth. Her presence, not her policy. AOC remained silent. She hadn't spoken all day, and somehow that silence now echoed louder than any outrage could have. The screen behind the prosecution showed a list of repeated phrases from Johnson's team terms that had circulated on social media in the days after the original hearing: hysterical, playing victim, camera actor, unstable. All traced back to internal directives, none coincidental, and then perhaps the final blow. One junior staffer from Johnson's team had turned whistleblower. In a sworn affidavit, they confirmed, we were told in explicit terms that making her angry was the goal. The anger would discredit her, make her unrelatable, and make our base feel superior. A gasp, sharp and real, slipped from someone in the gallery. The judge didn't gavel this time. She let the sound live. AOC slowly looked up. For the first time that day, she let her eyes sweep the room. Her stare wasn't cold. It was clear, clear enough to cut through everything. The judge leaned forward, voice steady. Let the record show that tactics designed to provoke, manipulate, and silence through distortion will not be ignored in this courtroom. A pause. Then she added, almost in a whisper, but one caught by every mic. This isn't just about defamation, it's about decency. The mask was off, not just Johnson's, but an entire playbook. And America was watching. The courtroom had been silent for nearly a minute. No one moved. No one shifted. Even the reporter stopped typing. And then finally, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood. Her chair slid back, gently, a soft but distinct sound against the marble floor. She didn't carry notes, no binder, just herself. Her posture was composed, but her voice, when it came, held a quiet fire, the kind that doesn't flicker. It glows steady. They didn't attack my policy. She began, eyes focused, not on the jury, but the nation beyond the camera lenses. They attacked my presence. She let the sentence settle. I came to that hearing with data. I came with numbers on asthma rates, school closures, the percentage of children going hungry in my district. I came with questions about mental health resources and failing roofs in Bronx classrooms. What I got back was character assassination. A murmur stirred. The judge motioned gently for silence, but did not interrupt. And this AOC continued, isn't the first time I've seen a woman punished for standing in the way of power. She took a breath. And then for the first time publicly, she spoke of her mother. When I was 10, she said, voice steadier. Now my mother was fired from her job as a janitor at a small clinic in Westchester. She had stood up for a black nurse, one of the only women of color in that hospital who had been reprimanded for being too loud with a patient. My mom didn't yell. She didn't march. She just said one sentence. She was doing her job. And for that, they told her she was no longer a fit for their environment. Her voice broke slightly, just enough to remind everyone watching that this wasn't a performance. It was recall, memory, bruise. I learned something that day, she said, that dignity is dangerous in the wrong room. Now she turned to face the jury. They didn't just try to discredit me, they tried to teach me a lesson, to make an example, and maybe I could take it. I've been underestimated before, but this isn't about me anymore. She turned back toward the judge, her voice resolute, now her hands folded calmly before her. This is about the next girl they try to silence, the next staffer who dares to speak in her natural voice, the next single mother who raises her hand in the wrong meeting, the next woman who doesn't flinch when she's told she's too much. A tear slid down the cheek of a woman in the back row. One juror, older, white-haired male, nodded faintly. No one looked at Johnson. He had for the moment disappeared from the story. AOC offered no dramatic flourish. She simply ended with a line that didn't echo, it lingered. If I let this pass, I'm complicit, and I won't be. And then without fanfare, she returned to her seat. A storm without thunder. Just truth. The courthouse steps became a kind of altar. Every morning at 8:02, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez arrived in silence. No makeup, no entourage. Hair pulled back. Always the same black coat, the same small binder tucked beneath her arm. Not once did she stop for reporters. Not once did she answer shouted questions. Her silence became louder than any statement. The trial had entered deliberation. The lawyers had finished. The evidence had been heard. Now the nation waited on edge. Cable news loops played the same 6-second clip on repeat. Johnson's voice caught on that secret audio. She's a prop in a dress, made for messaging. That sentence, once meant to dismiss, had become something else. It had gone viral, but not for the reason he intended. Teenagers turned it into TikTok edits, overlaying AOC's image with old footage of Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan. Fashion magazines published think pieces titled, Prop in a Dress, the Weaponization of Femininity. On subway walls and protest signs, the phrase was printed in bold serif font, then struck through with red ink. Beneath it, not this time. Outside the courthouse, the crowd doubled each day. Not loud, not unruly, just present. Teachers, nurses, students, women with strollers, men with briefcases. A quiet army of witnesses. Inside, the jury was sequestered. 12 strangers asked to define not guilt, but harm. The judge had reminded them this case was not about policy party or personality. It is about whether dignity, she said, is negotiable under pressure. And yet dignity was hard to define, harder to measure, even harder to restore. Still, the world watched. Even those who didn't care for politics tuned in. They were pulled not by headlines, but by that unexpected stillness, the refusal of a woman to explain herself again. There was something magnetic in AOC's restraint. She had stopped defending. She had started being. On day 2 of deliberation, a girl appeared on the courthouse lawn with a cardboard sign. She was maybe 11. Curly hair, purple coat, holding it over her head as if it weighed more than it did. The sign read, My voice is not drama. A local photojournalist captured the moment. The image spread across media outlets within hours. Late-night hosts stopped joking. Talk radio hosts stammered. For once, everyone seemed to understand this wasn't about winning. It was about recognition. Inside the jury room, no word leaked. Outside, hashtags rose like smoke. Hashtag deliberation day. Hashtag voice is not drama. Hashtag prop and address. And still AOC arrived each morning. No pressers, no smiles, just breath, just presence. As if daring the system to blink first. The world didn't know how to name what was happening, but it knew not to look away. The courtroom was packed beyond fire code. Every seat filled. Walls lined with quiet spectators. A low hum of breath held as the clerk stepped forward with a folded sheet of paper, thick, official, heavier than it looked. The jury had returned. Judge Ellen Rourke adjusted her glasses, nodded once. "Madam Foreperson," she said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" The woman stood mid-50s, composed, a slight tremble in her fingers. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The sheet was passed, unfolded. Silence. "In the matter of Ocasio-Cortez, Sir Johnson, regarding defamation with malicious intent." The judge paused, glancing at both parties. Alexandria sat motionless, hands folded on the table. Johnson leaned forward slightly, his jaw tight. "We, the jury, find the defendant liable." A sound, half gasp, half release, rippled through the room. But no one dared speak. The judge continued. "We award the plaintiff $30 million in compensatory damages." A sharp inhale came from the gallery, followed by stunned stillness. "And $90 million in punitive damages." There it was, $120 million. The exact number AOC's team had filed for, not a dollar less. Mike Johnson's head lowered, not in protest but in understanding. His face was pale, lips drawn. His wife, seated behind him, pressed a trembling hand to her chest and wept quietly, shoulders shaking but not drawing attention. There was no scene, no outburst, only the slow collapse of certainty. Across the aisle, AOC didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply blinked. Once. Then reached for a glass of water and sipped as if to steady not herself, but the moment. The judge banged the gavel once, sharp and final. "This court is adjourned." The reporters exploded outside, but the room itself remained hushed. The jury looked not at Johnson but at AOC, and one by one several nodded. It wasn't victory in the way courts usually deliver it. It was something older, something deeper. Restoration. As people filed out, a woman from the back row approached Alexandria quietly. No badge, no media pass. She whispered something and pressed a folded note into AOC's hand. Security moved, but AOC raised a hand gently. They stood down. Later, in a side hallway, far from cameras, she opened the note. Just one line. "You didn't win this for you. You won it for every one of us who had to swallow a scream." She folded it once more and placed it into her binder. Outside, as the sun set behind a gray Manhattan skyline, a chant began, not loud, not orchestrated, but human. "She spoke for us. She stood for us. She stood for us." Inside the courthouse, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood alone for one final moment, facing the now empty bench. She took a breath. No applause, no curtain, just the sound of truth settling into the air. And then quietly she walked out, not as a victor, but as a witness who had finally been heard. Alexandria didn't raise her hands. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. As the courtroom slowly emptied, she remained seated for a moment longer, letting the swirl of heels and whispers pass around her, like wind around a stone. Then gently she stood. No rush, no victory stance, just stillness. She turned toward the judge, not to thank her, but to acknowledge the weight of what had just happened. The judge looked back, firm, but not cold. "We are not here to judge emotions," she said softly. "Not for the record, but for the room. We are here to judge consequences." That was it. No silver speech, no dramatic ending. Just a sentence that landed like stone on still water, rippling outward through everyone who heard it. Alexandria bowed her head just slightly, not in deference to power, but in respect to the moment. It was not a cheer she gave the world, but a bow. A closing of one chapter, not with triumph, but with reverence. There had been too much noise already. The silence now meant more. As she stepped into the courthouse corridor, aides and supporters gathered instinctively. Some reached for hugs, others for applause. But she lifted a hand gently, not to stop them, but to quiet what didn't need to be said. Her expression was calm, even as the cameras flared and microphones surged forward. Outside, a subtle sound rolled across the crowd, not thunderous clapping, not chants or drums, but something smaller, deeper, a collective exhale, not celebration, relief. It was as if a nation had been holding its breath, unsure of what justice might look like, unsure if the system could still recognize the shape of dignity when it stood unshaken in a black suit in clear voice. Now they knew, and they let the air go. A young woman in the crowd clutched her phone and whispered to no one. She didn't just win, she restored the room. Cable news hosts scrambled to frame the verdict. Some called it overreach, others long overdue. But on the streets, on stoops, in subways, in nursing homes and high schools, people weren't quoting the payout. They were quoting the silence. The way AOC hadn't needed to shout to be heard. The way the judge hadn't raised her voice to make the world listen. That night, Alexandria returned to her apartment alone. She poured tea and champagne. She lit a single candle on her windowsill. She sat not to scroll headlines, but to write one page in her own handwriting for herself. History isn't written by the loudest. It's remembered through the quiet choices that leave a mark. She folded it, slipped it between two case files, then stared out at the city lights. There was no parade, no finale music, just a woman upright in the dim, knowing that she had turned an insult into a measure, and a trial into a mirror. The courthouse steps had seen protest, fury, grief, but today they saw something rarer resolve without vengeance. Alexandria stood at the top landing, a slim folder in one hand, the same black suit from the trial still pressed and unrumpled. The cameras had returned, but they felt smaller now, dimmed by the scale of what had just passed. Reporters waited. Supporters gathered with handmade signs. Detractors loitered further back, their silence heavier than their jeers. She didn't raise her voice. "I want to begin," she said calmly, "by thanking the people who never asked me to be anything other than human." The words hung soft but certain. She didn't read from a teleprompter. She didn't rehearse a soundbite. When I was first elected, people told me to tuck in my passion. That anger made me unlikable. That tears would make me unfit. That if I wanted to stay in rooms like this one, I needed to be less. She looked up. No shake in her voice. Just clarity. But emotion isn't a flaw. It's what made me show up. The crowd stilled. Some say that strength looks like cold detachment. But for millions of girls, especially those whose names never make the news, strength has always looked like their mother's second job. Their own silence in classrooms, the courage it takes to answer a teacher's condescension with dignity. She paused. Her next words were quiet but carried all the way to the street. "I didn't win today because I was clever. I didn't win because I had money or seniority or the right friends. I won because I remembered who I am and who I refuse to forget." Then she opened the folder. "I'm donating $3 million of the awarded damages to fund a national public school program for girls, especially girls of color, who are told their voices are too loud, their dreams too big, or their pain too inconvenient." A hush swept the crowd. She held up a simple document with one title at the top, the Ocasio Initiative for Courageous Youth. It begins this fall in 7 cities. We'll start with scholarships, mentorship, health services, and yes, civics education. But more than that, it will be a place to name the truths too many girls have to carry alone. There was no standing ovation, not yet, just held breath. "I didn't come here to get revenge," she said. "I came here to leave something better behind." Then she stepped back from the microphone. No fist in the air, no performance. Just a single nod to the young girl in the front row, clutching her mother's hand. In that stillness, legacy was quietly planted, not shouted into history, but rooted into it. And this time the courthouse steps didn't echo with noise. They held something deeper, the start of fire. The podium was quiet now. Reporters had begun lowering their cameras, sensing that the major announcements were over. But AOC wasn't finished. She reached into her folder one more time, not for a legal document, not for a press release, but for a photograph. She held it up slowly. It was soft-edged from age, a little curled at the corners. In the image, a woman in scrubs crouched beside a hospital floor above her sleeves, rolled hairnet in place. One knee pressed into the tile, a cloth in her hand. The date scrawled on the back in blue ink, June 1994. Alexandria didn't speak right away. "This is my mother." The crowd quieted further, if such a thing were possible. She was working a night shift at Queens General when this photo was taken. She'd been asked to mop a hallway that had already been done because a nurse had complained she was too slow earlier in the evening. She glanced down briefly, then back up. She had no microphone, no camera, no one live streaming her dignity, no judge defending her tone. She didn't get to sit in a courtroom and be believed. All she had was her body, her breath, and the hope that maybe, someday, her daughter might walk into a room and be heard. A hush fell over the courthouse steps like fog settling in. "I made sure I carried her microphone," she said softly. Somewhere near the front, a woman stifled a sob. Another placed a hand on her heart. These were not cheers that followed, but tears. Not thunder, but something deeper, reverence. She didn't teach me politics. She taught me presence. She taught me that surviving with grace is its own kind of power. Alexandria folded the photo carefully with both hands and returned it to her folder like sacred paper. And so when they tried to shame me for being emotional, for being loud, for being direct, I remembered who taught me to walk into rooms that didn't want me there. Not to conquer them, but to hold the space anyway. She looked toward the crowd, her gaze steady but misted. I wasn't raised for applause, I was raised for accountability. And legacy isn't just about what you build, it's about who you honor while building it. A few small claps began, hesitant but warm. No chants, no hashtags, just a kind of public grieving turned into gratitude. Behind her, the courthouse loomed cold carved stone, but in that moment it looked like the softest backdrop in the world. Not because it had changed, but because someone had finally spoken into it what it had long refused to hear. Mothers who scrub floors, daughters who lift voices, and silence no longer mistaken for peace. By the next morning, the moment had already entered lecture halls. At Columbia, a professor paused mid-discussion on First Amendment jurisprudence, pulled up a clip of AOC holding her mother's photo, and simply said, This is how law lives beyond the courtroom." At Howard, students watched the cross-examination on a loop, not because they were studying trial procedure, but because they were studying composure. In lecture notes across the country, new terms appeared: narrative integrity, racialized framing, and a new kind of witness, one who testifies not to be believed, but to shift the axis of who deserves to speak. Someone tweeted a screenshot of her testimony, one hand over her chest, the other resting on a single binder, with the caption, "She didn't just speak. She rewrote the rules." By midday, it had 2.7 million likes. On the Capitol steps, two former interns who once shared a cramped basement office under the Rayburn Building found each other again. One was now a junior policy advisor, the other a middle school civics teacher. They hadn't seen each other in 5 years. No words were exchanged at first, just a hug long shaking relieved. "She gave us language," the teacher finally whispered. "I didn't even know we were missing it." Editorial boards scrambled to frame the verdict. Some called it a political milestone, others a generational reckoning. But among communities of color, especially among women, the coverage felt secondary. The moment didn't need interpretation, it had already translated itself into lived memory. At a high school in Detroit, a girl named Janelle printed out AOC's quote, "I wasn't raised for applause. I was raised for accountability," and taped it inside her locker. She told her best friend she was going to run for class president, not because she thought she would win, but because people need to hear girls like me speak even if they don't vote for me yet. In Albuquerque, a church played the audio of AOC's speech during a Women's Sunday group. In Birmingham, a mural went up on the side of a law office. It was simple, just AOC in grayscale, her late mother's photo in one hand, the words "She carried it forward" painted above. Networks replayed the verdict, the reaction, the final bow. But the more powerful footage wasn't what aired on television. It was what came next: conversations, shifting classrooms, pausing young people scribbling in notebooks with a different kind of urgency. It wasn't just vindication, it was ignition. In a year cluttered with headlines, scandals, and empty noise, something quiet had claimed the national conscience. It didn't march with drums or erupt with confetti. It settled instead, like memory does, gently, deeply, permanently. The country didn't just react, it listened. And in listening, something changed. Washington didn't thunder, it withdrew. By Monday morning, Mike Johnson's office was locked. No aides shuffled in with coffees, no morning memos. His social media accounts vanished overnight. Tweets wiped, photos erased, bios blank. The man who once owned every news cycle now left a digital void so quiet it felt like a mausoleum. Former allies on the Hill moved swiftly. Archived press releases featuring his name disappeared from GOP sites. Emails once headlined Speaker Johnson's vision were revised to generic policy headers. A few reporters confirmed whispers donors had pulled back. Private meetings turned colder. One Republican strategist told Politico off record, "He's radioactive now. We're in cleanup mode." Capitol Hill became a city of closed doors and side glances. The phrase repeated in hallways, in elevators, and hushed coffee runs. He might resign. It wasn't spoken with shock. It was spoken with a kind of bureaucratic grief. The system knew how to bury its own, quietly, neatly, as if removing a name could erase a wound. Yet in the eye of the storm, AOC did not bask. She declined every major interview, CNN, PBS, even a personal request from Oprah's team. When the New Yorker called her office for an in-depth profile, the only reply was a three-word statement, "Not the story." Instead, she walked into a modest public school in Southeast D.C., tucked her hair into a loose bun, and spent 4 days teaching civics to 8th graders. No cameras, no press. Just 23 kids, some too young to grasp the trial's full weight, but old enough to sense something had changed. She opened the first lesson by drawing 2 words on the board: presence and power. Then she simply asked, "What's the difference?" By the second day, the students were quoting courtroom lines. By the fourth one, student raised her hand and asked, "Do they still think you were too emotional?" AOC paused, smiled softly, and said, "Only people who fear emotion mistake it for weakness." Outside that school, the city held its breath. Pundits speculated. Editorials flooded the morning cycle. Will she run for Senate? Has the GOP fractured permanently? But while power players jostled for narrative, AOC gave none of them a quote, not even a sentence. Silence became her strategy, and it spoke louder than any microphone. In the quiet, something rare happened in D.C. People listened to absence. They noticed who didn't speak, who didn't spin, who didn't retaliate. And that absence began to shape a new kind of presence. Johnson had once claimed the stage as his domain. Now even his shadow felt unwelcome. And somewhere in a classroom, a girl who had once felt invisible now raised her hand a little higher, held her voice a little steadier, and learned for the first time that presence could be power if wielded with purpose. Months later, it wasn't the courtroom footage that kept replaying, it was the sentence. One line pulled from closing arguments etched into the syllabus of over 30 law schools across the country. This isn't about speech. It's about using power to erase dignity. It appeared on slides in first-year ethics seminars at Yale. It was debated in Harvard's Constitutional Law Forum. It anchored a spirited discussion at Howard, where a black professor paused after reading it aloud and simply said, "That sentence is why we teach law." The case Ocasio versus Johnson 2025 became required reading in both jurisprudence and gender studies, not because of the verdict alone, but because of what it unveiled: how language can be weaponized and how a courtroom could become a reckoning, not just a ruling. But the ripples extended beyond academia. At a high school in Newark, a group of sophomore girls presented a project titled "When Emotion Stood on the Stand." Their final slide held no bullet points, just a handwritten note in cursive: "Thank you for giving us a mirror." A school counselor in Phoenix posted a photo of her classroom wall, a collage of letters from girls across the district, all written on pink construction paper. Some messy, some poetic. One read, "I cried when she said, 'They didn't attack my policy, they attacked my presence.'" That's how it feels here too. In a small town in Ohio, a student council president taped a quote above the gymnasium door. It read, "Emotion isn't a flaw. It's what made me show up." No one asked for permission. No one took it down. Even professors seasoned in their tenure and usually too cynical for inspiration found themselves rethinking the purpose behind their lectures. One posted to his faculty message board, "After 18 years of teaching, I realized I was grading arguments without ever asking whose dignity was being argued over." In San Francisco, a student-led seminar convened at UC Hastings. The topic: weaponized rhetoric where free speech ends and harm begins. Every seat was filled. The opening statement wasn't delivered by a professor, but by a 21-year-old junior who had once interned in D.C. She wasn't fighting for a verdict, the student said. She was fighting for us to be seen as full. And far from lecture halls and places where courtrooms seemed abstract and unreachable, her story still found its way. A rural librarian in Mississippi ordered a poster of AOC's quote and placed it above the fiction shelf. They can't dismiss your facts, so they attack your face. Vindication had never sounded so quiet, so studied, so deeply felt, because the case didn't just create precedent, it created reflection, and sometimes in the quiet flipping of textbook pages or the soft folding of a letter by a teenage girl, you could hear its legacy whispering its way forward. The camera opens on a modest brick building, worn but proud, nestled between a laundromat and a deli in the South Bronx. AOC stands at its entrance holding a manila folder close to her chest. No security detail, no press, just the echo of children's laughter in the courtyard behind her. Inside, a school librarian, older now, silver hair tied back, leads her past a wall of old trophies and photos. They stop at the small library. Nothing flashy. Fluorescent lights hum. A row of third graders are quietly reading at a round table. AOC walks to the back shelf where biographies of Harriet Tubman and Thurgood Marshall rest. She kneels, opens the folder, and places the full trial transcript between Brown v. Board of Education and the Diary of Anne Frank. She adjusts the spine until it aligns evenly. Then she stands, steps back, and exhales. Voiceover begins. Calm, reflective. The tone of a closing chapter. Vindication isn't a roar. It's what remains when the noise fades. Cut to a black and white flashback, little Alexandria, at 8 years old, sitting cross-legged in that same library, tracing the edges of a book about Rosa Parks. Her hair is in braids. Her backpack is too big. Her eyes already searching. The voice continues. Sometimes you don't win by shouting. You win by outlasting the storm. The image fades to present day. She walks outside alone down a familiar sidewalk, cracked by winter and memory. The air hums with city life. A boy on a scooter spots her. Miss AOC, a girl waves from a third-floor window. That's her. She came to my cousin's school. 3 more kids run out from the bodega shouting, "Congress, Congress." She smiles but doesn't stop for applause. Instead, she kneels to tie one boy's loose shoelace. "You good?" she asks. He nods, then races off like the moment never happened. The voice returns. She didn't ask to be followed. She asked to be remembered for standing. Final image, AOC walking further down the block, her black coat trailing in the wind, her steps steady and unhurried. She passes the mural painted years ago, "The Bronx Believes." But now there's a new line beneath it, spray-painted in cursive by a young artist. She didn't just make history, she made space. The music swells, gentle piano over quiet street sounds. No anthem, no spotlight. Just the real noise of children calling out to someone they trust, not as a hero, but as a mirror, a promise, a teacher of truth. Fade to black. If this story touched, you don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.